Hello, this is Gray Hughes of Gray Hughes Investigates on YouTube. This is the place to go if you believe that location is evidence in cases, and also if you like to discuss cases using logic, reason, and common sense, this is the place to go. Now, the Nancy Guthrie case is absolutely crazy. The case would be incredibly interesting even if she wasn't the mother of Savannah Guthrie. At the start of the case, I wasn't sure what the motive was or anything like that. I think a lot of people were out there wondering. People thought maybe it was the family. I think I thought that. Maybe somebody had her killed for inheritance, something like that. It looked like the police were investigating family members, etc., so you couldn't really rule that out, but then they cleared them. Okay, and right around that time frame is when I moved into the abduction for ransom gone wrong theory. But then, not too long after that, we switched over to the nut job theory. Now, the thing is the abduction for ransom gone wrong, it sort of didn't make sense because they sent the message to TMZ, one of them. Now we know that the first ransom note was sent to KOLD and another local news station. And then the next day, maybe 12, 13, 14 hours later, they sent that same message to TMZ, likely because they hadn't heard back from anybody. So they sent it to TMZ, who's likely going to come forward with the information. So that always made the abduction for ransom gone wrong seem a little weird. So then I believe I switched over to the nut job theory, where it's this person, much like an arsonist, who committed the crime and is just wanting to see the reaction, and perhaps had a sort of a emotional tie to Savannah Guthrie somehow and wanted to see her suffer. Okay, then rumors started coming out that there was an apology in the second one, and so that was like, weird, that's weird. Why would you want her to suffer, but then all of a sudden you're apologizing? And that was just a rumor that was out there. And so we've been on the nut job theory for a while. However, just recently, in the last week or so, there has been the article that came out by Reuters was just this huge hit. As a matter of fact, when Reuters came out with their article saying that the FBI does not believe any of their ransom notes, the case in my mind became as cold as you could possibly imagine, because at that point, we have Nancy Guthrie, who was abducted from her home at around 2:28, is likely around the time she was being moved out of the house. At 1:47, we know that there was an individual at the front door right here removing the Ring doorbell camera, and that's the person who went inside the home and abducted Nancy Guthrie. Now, there's some interesting elements to consider. For example, right here, we have the suspect wearing a balaclava. He's got a backpack on, and every bit of the clothing that he's wearing is likely clothing that he just purchased. Nobody's going to recognize this individual. He's got a balaclava on. And as you can see right here, and he's got a gun in the front there. But as you can see, he's not nervous to be on camera here because he's completely disguised. Now some people, you can see his eyes and maybe that he's got a goatee or something like that, but you can be assured that he probably shaved that off at some point. So if you're out there and you notice somebody shaved their goatee off right around that time, and you might suspect them, then call somebody to have them check it out. But when you look at this, there's this one shot in here. So I took a walkie-talkie and I put it right there. And this is something that has been pointed out for quite a while. At first, I didn't think much of it, but if it is a walkie-talkie, which it appears that it is, inside the pocket there, then I would think that it's almost certain that there's another individual at the scene. And I think there's probably somebody in a vehicle parked away over here, and then they're on a lookout too. So when he removed the camera at 1:47, he may have just stood back over in this area and he's communicating with the person with the walkie-talkie. I mean, hell, they could have even been walking around, because if you see a car, the lights in the distance, you can just move somewhere else and hide. It's not that difficult. But this person acted as a lookout and had a walkie-talkie. So after about 20 minutes or so, after 1:47, I would say 2:08 or 9, they start heading back. And then at 2:12, motions picked up on a camera back in the backyard there. Then they go inside the home and they do whatever they do. And when they're ready to remove Nancy Guthrie from the home, he gets the walkie-talkie out and has the person in the vehicle drive the car right into the driveway here and park it right there. And so what it means is that these people went there, and it is possible that it's just one person. Okay, they could have parked a car, tied her up or something, went and got the car, moved it around, or even moved it right in front of the house at around maybe it was like 2:10 or something. They pulled the car around, and that would make the car, in the driveway for about 18 minutes at that point. So that's why it's better to have somebody pull it in. But these people went here to abduct Nancy Guthrie. They didn't steal anything. They made sure that the camera at the front door was removed so that they could pull the car up right here in the driveway. And they wanted to make sure that the vehicle wasn't seen on camera, and that's it. And so at that point, you could use the front door to go in and out if you wanted to. We don't know exactly how the person got into the home. I would say that, there's a good chance that they went in the back here. Apparently they propped open that door, and they propped open this gate over here. Now, I think those are propped open in case he got a signal like, hey, they're coming. You could bolt out and just jump out, run out the back door instead of trying to fiddle with it and open the door. You could just get out of the home. So they were propped open, and they removed Nancy Guthrie. Now, let's just say the ransom notes were not true. They weren't real. We would have absolutely nothing in this case. There is nothing. They might have surveillance footage, lights on a camera somewhere. I think that's probably likely. But we would have absolutely nothing. But recently, the information that was in the ransom notes was revealed. For example, in the first ransom note, it said, "Hello, Savannah." That sounds like something maybe a female might write. A guy wouldn't say, "Hello, Savannah." It just isn't how guys normally are. Now, it could be a female, but I'm just theorizing on it. I think it's possible, by the way these notes are written, that it's a male and a female. They say, "Hello, Savannah, we have Nancy," and then they do a ransom demand for $4 million by a certain time, and then $6 million by another date. And if we don't have the money by that time, then we'll kill her. All right, but I believe that Nancy Guthrie was not even alive when they wrote that message, because apparently it was between 5 and 7 is when KOLD got the ransom note on the 2nd in the evening. So that means about 40 hours passed after the kidnapping. And so they said that in the second ransom note, if we even want to call it a ransom note, the second note that was written by the same person that wrote ransom number 1, they sent out basically an apology, and what was on that is right here. Nancy died and was buried in nature. So that means they didn't just throw her on the side of the road, they buried her. They buried her body in somewhere, and then in the evening they wrote the letter. So they wrote the letter, the first ransom note, when Nancy was already dead, and they just did a Hail Mary. They thought that the information that they put in the ransom note, which did validate that they were the abductors by putting in where the watch was found, and there's probably some other information in there too. They were able to validate who they were. However, Savannah and them asked for, I think in one of the messages, they asked for proof, even talking about don't use AI, etc. So they wanted proof that Nancy was still alive. And they were not given the proof. they couldn't prove it because they actually had already buried her and didn't have time to get other information. Like they could have interviewed her and got some specific information and put that in the letter, but they didn't have time to get that. She likely passed away not too long after they abducted her. So they were not able to prove that she was alive. And then we got a couple more messages, another message, I think, from Savannah, etc., pleading for the kidnappers. But I think Savannah got to one of the abductors, perhaps the female, if there is one. And they felt like they just needed to, they didn't mean to kill Nancy Guthrie. Like that wasn't part of it. They didn't mean to kill her. That's why they said Nancy died and was buried in nature. So she was buried in nature, meaning that she wasn't thrown on the side of the road, and they buried her. We did not fully grasp the seriousness of her physical condition. So probably when they abducted her, Nancy would have told them, hey, I have problems, etc. Or they knew somehow, I think if it was a family member, they would know the seriousness of her condition, that she's on, has a pacemaker, blood thinners, etc. And it says, we never intended to hurt her. That was not our intention, right? So they're saying that, they didn't want to hurt her. And I think that's why it sort of feels like this was written by a female here, because I think a guy would just have, whoa, they didn't mean to kill her, but they wouldn't, dare send something in again, because you're taking a little bit of a risk by communicating again. However, they probably felt very confident in the technique they're using to not be identified. I bet you even on the secured server, when they set it to KOLD anonymously, I bet they even use like VPNs to send that message. So it's really difficult to identify where the message came from on message 1 and 2. And then it says she perished shortly after she was taken. So to me, shortly after means, within a few hours, right? We believe it was heart related. And so they didn't know what her condition was, her physical condition. They thought maybe she was normal, like just an elderly person. But we believe it was heart related, they're saying, because they probably noticed what she was doing, etc. Then they put out a portion of the message that was meant to make Savannah feel better. Nothing you could have done could have changed the outcome. We're truly sorry. What that means is that Nancy was dead before they wrote the first ransom note. And then one of the interesting elements in the first note was that, if you send the ransom in, she will be returned to Tucson. Now, I think that might be perhaps a little deception there to make it seem like they're outside of Tucson and will bring her back. I've always thought that the person is somewhere near living in Tucson. So these messages, etc., are what made me really go hard on the abduction for ransom gone wrong, because I really can't. The second message, I think even the FBI will tell you that, and even the profilers out there, that second note is sort of the outlier that has more meaning to it. The second note is something that a nut job, for example, wouldn't have written. They were just there to terrorize. There wouldn't be a moment where they would put something in there like that. It makes no sense at all. In the abduction for ransom gone wrong, it makes complete sense. It means that they really abducted her just for ransom. I think they're probably a younger couple, if there's two people, maybe like 25 to 30 years old. Not incredibly experienced, but were very confident, had a good plan. They haven't been caught. The only problem is that Nancy died, and they did not mean for her to die, and one of them felt bad enough to sort of apologize and console Savannah, etc. Like nothing you could have done could have changed the outcome. We are truly sorry. All right, so that was an attempt to make Savannah feel better. And the thing is they buried her somewhere, and they're likely not going to say where they buried her because, as we all know, hair, fibers, all kinds of different forensic evidence can be left on or near a body. Look what happened to Rex Heuermann. I mean, he buries these bodies in burlap sacks, and then they find hairs on, like, a ton of his victims. They find a hair that lead back to family members, etc., using genetic genealogy. So I think that's exactly why they wouldn't even come forward and say that. So you're going to have to capture them to get the answer. So recently, however, we had this issue, again, with Reuters. See, Reuters is like an incredibly prestigious news organization where they don't screw up. So when they came forward and said that the ransom notes are not real, the FBI, two other sources in the FBI said they're not real. It just was wow. Because then you're at a point where there's no information after Nancy was abducted from the home. And then we had Harvey. So we got to give credit to TMZ. It's hard to do because TMZ a lot of times just puts out sensationalistic crap. But in regards to the ransom notes, I think they were telling us the truth the whole time because, you know, they know the FBI is listening too. So they're putting out accurate information. So Harvey, in his dealings with the FBI regarding the ransom note that they got and that the slew of other ransom notes they got, or more like those weren't really ransom notes. They were just demand for, you know, pay for information letters. You know, the FBI has been working with them. And they had IT from a TMZ talking to the FBI for hours and hours and hours and hours. So I would say that Harvey has the best source in the FBI in this group. You know, like I think he's got a better source than Brian Enton. I think he's got a better source than Reuters. And they responded to him when he asked, because that was confusing to him. They said that the first two ransom notes were more likely than not real. And then they said that the second writer, you know, the one that sent in a whole bunch of them, trying to get the Bitcoin, he is more likely than not real. Now, it's a he or she, whatever, we don't know. But it's more than likely not real, they say. But I actually think that they think that that one might be connected, and that's why they're so interested in it. So now we have two completely opposite statements. Harvey had two sources in the FBI, and Reuters had two sources in the FBI. One said that they're not real. The other one said more likely than not they're real. So after that, then the FBI, Phoenix, put out this statement right here. Said the FBI and its task force partners have received several ransom notes over the course of this investigation. Some have been deemed to be extortion attempts without legitimacy. Other ransom demands may potentially be legitimate and are still being investigated as such. Now, this is where the key part of this is. You know, when they say may potentially be legitimate, that's just a CYA comment. I believe the FBI believes 100%, I would say 99%, that these ransom notes, the first two, were legitimately from the kidnapper. And it says right here, this case continues to be investigated as a kidnapping for ransom case. So when you see the word continued, as I said on my show, it means that they've been investigating this as a kidnapping for ransom. And I believe that they must believe then that it's a kidnapping for ransom gone wrong, and they believe that second note. And it makes the most sense. Now, you're going to have a bunch of YouTubers out here, because this is how it always works, you guys. Whenever there's this information that makes more sense, it just doesn't add up to these super sleuthy YouTubers out there. So what they'll do is they'll keep peddling the other ideas. They'll go after the family. They'll go after this person and that one and this one and this one. Instead of like really trying to like, okay, this gives us as a true crime community a direction to follow, and let's see what it means. So you're going to get people that are going to say it was, as I said on my show last night, you're going to get people that say that it was an abduction for ransom, but it was a hired situation, and it was made to look like it was an abduction for ransom, etc. Well, I mean, you can go and do all that you want, But I'm telling you, the second ransom note, to me, throws all of that away. You know, you wouldn't do any of that. You would just have sent in a ransom note and then never communicated again. But somehow, the person who wrote this had feelings. They felt bad that Nancy died, and that's what you would get in an abduction for ransom gone wrong, because you intend to give the person back alive. And I think if you're, not ruthless, they were just like trying to get a quick money grab, a ton of money, see if they could get it. But they actually felt bad that Nancy died. And maybe some of the messages that Savannah put out, they know they're responsible for making them feel that way, and felt like they needed to put out that one last message, and they haven't heard from them since. But the information that we've been given in the last week prove that the FBI is looking at this as a kidnapping for ransom gone wrong. 100%. I think they absolutely believe it. And when they use words like maybe, more likely than not, they're just covering themselves in case there is just some random thing where it turns out that whoever wrote the first ransom note guessed at like a bunch of different things and got it right. Okay? That would be a miracle. So they believe that they're real, everybody. So make sure that you hold your favorite YouTubers out there accountable. Okay? I'm going to go with the abduction for ransom gone wrong. And that's kind of where we've been anyways, since that first indication of what the second note said. And then even a while back, I was in that camp as well. But I've really only been in, it's either a crazy nut job or kidnapping for ransom gone wrong. And I think the information right now indicates that it is a kidnapping for ransom gone wrong. You've got the walkie-talkie, the use of the word we in the ransom notes. I forgot to mention that earlier. And that sort of indicates that there's more than one person. And I think the we helps bolster the walkie-talkie element. It really does. Now, you could say, oh, they put the we in there just to throw people off. Yeah, I mean, we can play that game all day long. But here's what we do know. The FBI, who knows a hell of a lot more than us, is continuing to investigate the case as a kidnapping for ransom, and they have been. And I think they've been looking at that since February 2nd. They've been investigating this case as a kidnapping for ransom. They just haven't been able to figure out who sent those first two notes. All right, so come on to the show tonight, and we'll continue to talk about this and work through it. Maybe we'll open up the phone lines if you still think it's something else and you can make a better argument. That would be great. It's difficult to do, though, because at this point, see, we put logic and reason and common sense into all the things that we do on my channel. And right now, it seems incredibly likely that the case is exactly what the FBI is investigating. Kidnapping for ransom. And I think they also know that it went wrong based on the second message that they believe is real. And let me just throw one last comment out there. How would the FBI classify this case as a kidnapping for ransom if they didn't get a ransom note? That's just something you might want to think about. That's how you know they believe that that first note was a genuine ransom note. And because the second one was written by the same person, we don't know how they know that. But because they believe that and know that, they are investigating this as a kidnapping for ransom case. All right? All right, you guys. That is going to do it. I hope this all made sense to you. Check out the channel later tonight. Also, we're going to be covering the Tyler Robinson hearing, the preliminary hearing on my channel the whole week. So make sure to come check that out. I have 360-degree video. I actually went to Orem, Utah back in October of last year and got a lot of really good footage, etc. All right, so thank you all very much for watching. We'll see you guys a little bit later. And as I always say, until next time, be safe out there.